Today I'm going to be talking to Stephen and Evan Strong, a father and son archaeology team in Australia, and we've got some super interesting information to relate today. I haven't done any shows with Australian guests other than Max Egan and Santos Bernacci, but today this is going to be to do with ancient history in Egypt and based in Egyptian hieroglyphs, based, I should say, based in Australia. And, this is off the wall, but from what I see from the evidence and what I looked at, this is like got credibility all over, and this is something that really needs to be addressed. So I'm looking forward to having these guys on. Just let me give you a quick plug in for the website. You can go to capricornradio.com. You can check out the archives of previous guests. We're going to talk about some of maybe Laird Scranton's tie-in. You can catch out Laird's show there, and Shannon Dory, who's also researched the Dogon. Maybe we're going to tie in some of that as well. You can also check out the Facebook group and the Facebook page and the YouTube channel, all at capricornradio.com. Get involved, guys. Keep the guest requests coming in. I do look at every single one. I will do my best, and if there's a repeat of guest suggestions, that really draws my attention. So keep sending them all in, guys, and they're much appreciated. And thank you for all the well wishes and comments for recent shows. That's very encouraging, keeps me going. So I'm not going to go into the guys' bios today. Stephen and Evan Strong's going to give us that ourselves. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't read out the bio, but these guys are going to tell us all about it because this is part of the story. So without further ado, let's bring on the guest for today. Welcome to Capricorn Radio, guys.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for asking.
We're very happy to be here.
So that's Stephen I heard first, and Evan was second. Is that correct?
That's a good pickup. It is
Very
right.
good,
Yes,
yep.
that's right.
Well, I have watched some of your YouTube shows, so I feel I got to know your voices a little bit. So Stephen is the father and Evan is the son. Is that correct?
That's exactly
That's
right.
it.
We've been called brothers on some occasions, and I thank those people for saying that, but unfortunately my age is beyond that.
Yeah. I get that sense there's like a brotherly thing there as well as a fatherly thing. You guys work very close together and you're very connected in what you're doing, I suppose. I guess I'm going to talk to the father first, Stephen. I want to know, what's your background? What got you into all this? And then we'll talk to Evan next.
Okay. Well, my background to begin with, I'm a teacher. And over the years, I became more and more involved in Aboriginal issues, Aboriginal culture, Aboriginal history, and I was involved in writing the course for New South Wales for the senior education, for the high school certificate, rather. And over a period of time, people started to trust us, and they started to show us things that weren't mainstream at all. And it sort of grew out of that. And there came a time, and I do remember, I was at school, and every spare moment I'd sit out the front and write. And then when I get home, I'd get to write till about 12 or 1 o'clock. And it dawned on me I was doing 2 jobs and I only had room for one. So we had to pick one or the other. So I walked away from teaching, and which is a reasonably paid job, to a paid job that's not so reasonably paid. We started writing. And what we're doing is, because of that 20 odd years working with the elders, we learned something. When the elders talk about oral history and talk about their past, they deliver it with such a passion and such a devotion and such an attention to detail. It soon dawned on me that this oral history was much more valid than anything I'd seen written on a piece of paper. And when we started doing this, we learned straight away, unlike a lot of archaeologists in this country who walk onto site with a preconceived idea of what they're going to see, we learned to do something at the very beginning. Most of the other ones still haven't picked up. We walked onto a site after asking permission and then spoke to the people and said, what is it we need to know? Tell us where it is, and then we'll try and justify it. So we came at it from a different point of view. We didn't walk in with an idea what it was. We waited for the elders to give us that idea. And what we've done is, when we're with elders that we know the old ways and are conversant in it, we don't question it. We just take it that way. If it wasn't for elders, we would never have touched the UFO story. In fact, when we wrote our first 3 books for University Press of America, we were very careful to stay very much in the strong science, and we did. That's why they published it. But the elders won't have it any other way now. We then moved into Egypt, and now we've gone past Egypt and we're just walking off into the skies. So it's a 25-year story that starts with teaching with a couple of Aboriginal kids and ends up working just with Aboriginal people. And now here we are now. I'm not teaching anymore, but we're still doing the same thing.
Wow. Evan, how do you come into this story then?
Well, my background's actually in social sciences and psychology. And while I was at uni, I did there's a bit of a broad degree, so I ended up doing a bit of archaeology and anthropology at uni just for fun at that point. And it's the only thing I use now out of all the different majors I did. But yeah, so I kind of the one that comes in and will kind of try to back up whatever theory or paradigms put forth. So I'll look for evidence where I can find it and draw it in from different disciplines. And I really enjoy that aspect of it, kind of as opposed to having maybe academic tunnel vision, kind of looking at different disciplines and bringing them all in together, because there's more connections than anyone realizes. So yeah, that's kind of my background to bring that aspect into it and help the best I can.
How do you guys work together? Do you get on well? Is there any this is just me from the human perspective. Is there any ever altercations, or do you work well together?
Oh, come on, I'm his father. This has to be issues. It's a given, isn't it? Yeah. Look, it works like this. It does work out pretty well because I'm if when the founding Luddite Society starts in Australia, I'll be the founding president. I can't even use a mobile at the moment. So I can't do any research. I can't find anything on a computer or a screen. I go and write with pen and paper. So what Evan does is he goes and finds all this stuff for me because I can't find anything. So it's a bit like I bring in one part of the equation, which is I can write a bit, and Evan does some of that too. And then he goes and finds all the information I need to build this up. So he's always looking for new science. And some of the times he shows me stuff and I think, oh, that's rubbish. I don't need that. And then 4 days later, I realized I actually did need it. So he brings in the empirical part of this that I can't find. Otherwise, I'd just be writing about my own personal experiences and walking on the site, and I wouldn't have that science. So that's a mixture of the two of us. Luckily, I'm just so illiterate when it comes to computers, and he isn't. There's a nice balance.
Yeah, we kind of balance each other out in a way.
Sure.
Yep.
So, guys, we're going to talk about the book today, Ancient Aliens in Australia. And I know you've got several books out there, guys, but you know, this is like a story that's kind of become taboo, and nobody wants to deal with this. But you guys have took this on, and I commend you for it because, you know, I'd watched the YouTube videos, guys, of yourselves and Auntie Bev and the Parksman. I think it was the Parksman who managed the Kariong glyphs, and you know, his testimony is key to this. So we're going to talk about. I think the first thing to bring in is the Kariong glyphs. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And the Parksman that really, the guy there that kind of can testify to the authenticity of these and the antiquity, maybe that these guys are treating these glyphs like they're a hoax when they really have been proved to have been there long before when they said they were hoaxed. So I think this is the key thing to bring in, the glyphs, how they were found by the Parksman. I can't remember his name.
Well, that's really, I appreciate you've gone that way because you're actually going the way we would do this. When we first went to the glyphs, when we were first asked to speak about it, I wouldn't. We didn't even speak about it publicly, did
we knew that they were very tainted.
They're tainted, and we had all this Egyptian stuff we'd found. We'd found ankhs engraved into rock platforms and thoth engraved into rock platforms. We knew Egyptians were there, but we weren't going to touch it at all. So we came at this from the point of view of, no, we're not convinced. We didn't come here as someone actually swinging the banner saying we want to fight for the glyphs. We actually told them, we'll tell them Egyptians were there, but we won't touch the glyphs. So we've come at this from a very gradual process. Now, what you said is exactly where we changed our point of view. We conducted an interview with David Fitzgerald. That's the gentleman you were talking about. Now, the story with David is he works for National Parks and Wildlife. And what happened was he'd heard talk about these glyphs in 1978. Now, it's very important that date is locked in because National Parks and Wildlife and the Australian government would tell you they didn't know about it until 1983. That is a fact. You can ring them up and they'll tell you it was made in 1983. Now, what happened was David, what was called the Aboriginal Sites Officer. He worked for them, but what he would do is when there were Aboriginal sites, he'd be involved in that and work with the parks and they'd fix it up. He knew about this place, but they wouldn't give it to him. They wouldn't show him. So what he did was he found a site, a really important site, and he showed them pictures. They said, oh, well, take us out, we'll do it. He said, no, I won't take it out unless you take me out to the glyphs. So cut a long story short, he was taken out at dusk and he was sworn to secrecy in 1978. And as he walks there, what he saw was just a couple of glyphs at the top. The rest of it was covered in tons and tons and tons of debris. Now, David said there was a roof on top until the 1960s. We now have a stat deck from someone, and we've written it in our book.
Yep.
Yes, there was a roof there. A tractor drove on the top in the bush trying to make a rubbish tip, very typically Australian. That's how we use the bush. And he drove on top of the roof and it collapsed. And it's still there today. Now, David said that from that point, 1960, rubbish had been falling in, and he saw decades upon decades of fill inside there. In fact, it took a gang 2 days to clear it out. Now, 1983, they reckon it was made. That's a lie. National Parks and Wildlife know it's a lie, and I'll call them liars now publicly, and have done so many times, and they know they're lying. David is quite insistent. So what then happened was, he then was basically told to shut up about the whole thing. I asked him once, why didn't you say anything? He said, well, if I did, I'd lose my job. It was that simple. That was the threat. And he knew that. So he shut up. And when he left National Parks and Wildlife, he sat on this for a long time, didn't he?
He did, yes.
Because there was so much fuss and so many people were coming and they were doing the wrong thing. Yeah. He waited until someone approached this the right way. And he's decided we did. So then what happened was we then had a base. But Arnie Bev Spears, as you know, she was the other person on the interview. Now, her story is more important because she's the last full descent Darking Young elder, the spokesperson of the country. The one, in fact, she's called the keeper of the stories.
Yep.
Well, there's the person I've got to talk to. Now, Arnie Bev's a funny one because she only gives up a bit of information each time. To begin with, she wouldn't even say they were Egyptian. But this is where it gets interesting. There's a lot of people have complained that the glyphs look quite fresh, don't they, Evan?
They do, yeah.
They always say, too fresh,
yeah, that's just happened. Yeah.
Arnie Bev told us the women would go there for millennia and go there and coat the actual glyphs in women's urine, not men's, women's urine, to keep it fresh. So when you put that together, you have the original people telling us, oh, it's thousands of years old. It is Egyptian. And you've got the last descent story keepers saying, and this is how we kept it fresh. Then you've got the gentleman who worked for the National Parks and Wildlife, chosen as their Aboriginal Sites Officer, chosen for that reason because of his skills, which are undoubted. He's telling us the same story. They're ancient. So what we then decided was, now we must speak about them. Because before that point, we don't walk anywhere. As I said earlier, we don't make decisions. The elders tell us what the decision is because they are the custodians of the history and the truth, not us. So once we knew about that, then we decided, now we look at the glyphs anew. And now we start to speak about them because the elders have asked us to do so. So that's really an important part of that. And as you mentioned, that's on one of our YouTubes. The second one, from my point of view, I would have had that first. I would have preferred that came first because we always like to lead off with the original story first. And we thank you for going that way. But unfortunately, other people who were doing this for us, and it was all done for free. We don't have much say when it's for free. It came second. But for us, it's the most important part of the story because without the elders telling us where to go, we don't go anywhere.
Mm.
Okay, so for the listeners then, we're talking about the Kariong glyphs. I have no problem over the authenticity of them. Or at least I have no problem over the authenticity of how they were found. Therefore, I don't believe any of the taboo around them and the hoaxing theory or the trick that was played or whatever garbage that was rolled out to dispel these glyphs. So I have no problems like pushing that aside. Like I said to you guys in the pre-show chat, I mean, we could do more research. I think I said to you there's the science of petrology, and I can, you know, if you could get guys in there with microscopes to check in the grooves of the carvings, that would maybe give you, because there's micas and depending on the stuff, I don't know what type of rock that they were carved with, but depending on the type of rock, you should be able to at least prove whether the carvings are relatively recent or relatively centuries old. You might not know how many centuries old or how many millennia old, because I think we're talking millennia here. But I just think that's something else further for research. But I mean, this whole hoaxing theory can just be pushed aside as far as I'm concerned. And I mean, the guy has testified, like, this is not how it was, and but for the guys that are out there listening to the show, and you guys have just been on Red Ice Radio as well, and it was an awesome show that you did there. Great show, Henrik. He brings out the best in all. But I guess tell people about these Kariong glyphs. What's the content? What's the story of the glyphs? Because all glyphs tell a story as well.
This one tells two stories, we believe.
Yeah, 2 stories.
And I think that's the problem, you see, James. A lot of people try to make this into one continuous narrative, but it's not. That's the first thing we learned. And again, our clue was Ani Bev, who started speaking about the fact that the Egyptians came here and wrote their language and learnt off the original people. That's the first time I'd heard that. And she went further and said, we had a language before them. Now, that was basically a very important starting point for us, wasn't it?
Yeah, a major difference.
Yeah, so look, what it is, there are about 300 engravings between 3 sandstone walls, not 2 like everyone said. It's actually 3. Everything is a lie. They all say it's 2. It's actually 3 different walls.
Yeah.
Now, on the smaller wall, which still has the roof above it, by the way, for those who think this roof story may be rubbish, the smaller wall has underneath it 34 glyphs that talk, and we've seen the cartouche that says Lord de Jeb. It talks about Lord de Jeb and Nefertari coming to this country, the
shipwrecked, and then they journey westward
for 2 seasons. It is, yeah.
There's
and
a
then
drought, I think.
A drought, and then unfortunately for Nefertari, who obviously is not very well coordinated, he got bitten by a snake twice. Now that is bad luck because they've got to pull back and go again. So I don't know what he was doing between bites, but he died, and they reckon he was buried in the shaft around the back. Now, what we found was, if you look at the narrative of the Egyptian part of this, we have a book that was compiled by Ray Johnson. It was checked with Dr. Abu Diagazi from the Egyptian Antiquities Library, and they worked together and said, yes, this is the most ancient form of glyphs, Egyptian glyphs. So we worked on that. And we found an 82% match with the glyphs we had in our book and that section. But here's the trick, James. When you go to the rest of it, we had a 44% match. That's about half what we had from the rest. And it became pretty obvious to me. The reason, one of the critiques has been, oh, it's a mixed match. They've got Sumerian there. There's all sorts of glyphs there. It can't be legit because it's all mixed up. If it's the first language, the beginning language, every other language is derivative. Like English is derivative of other languages. So therefore, that would make sense to us. So it dawned on us straight away. There's an ancient narrative there, just like Arnie Bev said, that tells us something, and that story has got nothing to do with shipwrecks. It's got nothing to do with any names. It is a much more mystical and much more ancient story, and it's got nothing to do with an Egyptian narrative. So when we say Egyptian, yes, it is Egyptian. Everything there is Egyptian in one respect because it's the base they work from. But the more ancient glyphs, which I think were there well before the Egyptian narrative, that was put onto a side wall right up the back in the corner, wasn't it, Evan?
Yes, it was.
It's away from the rest of them, and that's really obvious by its placement. We think that older story points to a lot of different directions, and it certainly points into the nighttime sky big time. So we see 2 different stories there. What's really important, James, we only just got this evidence back 3 weeks ago.
Yes.
The story with the glyphs is they were supposed to have taken place around about 4,700, 4,600 years ago, right? This is when these brothers were supposed to have come. There had been, a long time ago, some people looking at it, and a lady by the name Michelle went up the top and found these star markers. Well, they were just circles. They didn't know what they were.
They're engraved, kind of pecked in circles into the rock.
And they're directly above the glyphs, and that's the closest rock platform to the glyphs. Now, I've got to tell you, around this area, James, there are 3,500 star markers, but these are the closest. What's important about that is these people went to Sydney Uni, and everyone's read about it. We've all read about this story where they got a date which was 4,600 years old. It was the night sky 4,600 years ago. Now, directly above the glyphs, you'd think that's a hell of a coincidence because we know this was done by Egyptians. It's engraved. It's not like the stuff between the walls. Now, the map was said to be stolen, gone, misplaced. Sydney Uni said, we don't have it anymore. Yes, you did come in, but we don't have any proof. 3 weeks ago, the map came to us. And lo and behold, down the bottom, it gives a date, which is 2500 BC. It even gives the time of the day. It gives the latitude and longitude. And I looked at the actual star markers, and it's exactly what's on the rock platform. What's important about that, if this is a fake, then this is a bloody good one, mate, because someone's managed to crawl up the top and then not carve like they've done elsewhere. And each one of those engravings takes about 800 hits to get it to that stage. We know that because Bednarek did work on that. They spent a lot of time embellishing this engraving. So what we found, James, is we decided not to work on the glyphs, but to work around the glyphs and find the other supporting evidence. And that's when we found a new set of glyphs.
Yeah.
National Parks and Wildlife will not look at it. They won't acknowledge it, and they don't want to know about it. But we've seen it. We've got pictures of it, and I've been there, and I've taken people there. It's there. And what's interesting about that set of glyphs is no one claimed, whoever did the fakes, went off into the bush and just did glyphs all over the place. They said they did it between the walls. So they've got to change their story for this. But what's more important is it's a different hand. It is 1/3 the size and probably 1/3 the incision. It's done with something much less sharp and much more defined. But the story on the back of it, there's 4 glyphs at the finish, which read coffin, back shaft, sacred object that can only be taken by a pharaoh, the son of the pharaoh when he dies, and it points directly towards the back shaft of the glyphs. Now, behind the glyphs, there is a 10-meter shaft, which is artificial. There's pictures up on our website. I'm sure you've seen it.
Right angle.
Yeah. Now, the story was that the Nefertru was buried there. Now, to continue that story, that glyph says exactly the same thing and points towards where that shaft is and says it's in the back shaft. There's a coffin in there. There's a regalia that a son of the pharaoh would have. That's pretty convincing evidence.
Is there Sorry, Stephen. Is there alignment on that shaft, like a compass alignment?
That is part of what we're going to do with land when we go there in a couple of weeks. We're going to do some really refined work with it in about 3 weeks. We're going back down because we're now finally, praise the Lord, some people are actually sponsoring us so we don't have to pay our own plane fares and food. So we're racing back down to work on alignment. And what we're also going to do is we're going to actually send pictures across to Lard Scranton, who's going to help us sort of we know we've got the general story.
Yeah.
But we're talking to Lard today, and there are some glyphs I didn't read that he can read. And I think between us, we can make a really defined story about this. So the alignment we're going to do, what we've been mainly doing in the meantime is going around the edges. We sort of kept away from the glyphs to go all the way around. We've been given some jewelry and maybe the hip bone of Nefertru by another elder, Auntie Minnie Mace. She went there with Ray Johnson 25 years ago and was drawn to these 2 artifacts. I've shown this metal to metallurgists all over Australia. They can't recognise it. We know there's no copper, there's no brass, and there's no iron ore in it, and it's not magnetic. And they don't know what it is. And it's got a perfectly circular clasp on the top.
Yeah, it's like it's been meant to be worn as a necklace.
As a necklace. It is a necklace. It was found between the 2 walls, as was something that we think could be the hip bone. Now, we've taken this actual bone to the CAT scan unit of the local hospital. And they closed the unit up for an hour and then did a 6 times the normal amount because they said the patient wouldn't complain. And we've got a readout of it. And what they told us was it has the same density as a bone. And the fractious person told us it's ancient and it looks like it could be a hip bone. So there's a good chance that when that grave was robbed, and we know it was and taken out, they maybe dropped that piece of metal jewelry and the hip bone, and another original elder gave it to us. And we still have that in our presence now. So what we did is we kept looking around and we found all this other evidence. There's a lot more which we've written about. We won't go through all of it. And then we decided we'll go back to the glyphs now. Now we'll go back there because we now have all that substantiating evidence around it saying the same story. And now when we go back there and we look at those stories, and after Wani Bev told us, we know for an absolute fact. In fact, if I can share with you, the reason why we know it's a fact, James, is because last year we took a correspondent from the ABC, which is the national broadcaster for Australia, took her on site to the other artifacts, to the shaft, to the other set of glyphs, to all the other things we've spoken about. We didn't take her to the actual glyphs. She was so taken, she did up a news item, 1 minute 40 seconds, and lo and behold, on December the 10th last year, it was the second item on the national news around Australia. It was everywhere. It went up on the website, and it was so pro-us, the website article was embarrassing. I thought they could have put one dissenting voice in there, but they didn't. She was over the top. Within 2 hours, that radio broadcast was taken off every radio station in Australia, and the website was crashed. Now, why would they do that if we're idiots? And that's ABC, and actually Evan spoke to, didn't you?
Yeah, I have a friend that works inside, and he said for it to come down in that amount of time, there wouldn't have been time for a community complaint or something, that it has to be from a up above management, upper management kind of position. It's been pulled from whoever's in charge. It's the only way it could disappear so quickly.
So we now know, thank you to the Australian government, we are right. Because if we were fools and idiots and just making a fool of ourselves, why would they go that much trouble? I've been in contact with the ABC about a site up here. They were nearly nasty towards me. We found a site here that could be the first language, a chronicle of the first language on this planet.
It's basically our Australian version of Stonehenge.
In fact, the professor that found it called it Australia's Stonehenge. I can't get that on local ABC here. They won't touch us with a 10-foot pole. Now, we've had it overseas. Everyone's been talking about it. But in this country, we can't even get it on local radio. And they were really belligerent and nasty towards us. The same with national parks and wildlife.
You guys are meeting a lot of resistance over this then. A lot of resistance, like.
Well, let's share this with this. We just went on with, what was it, Radio Freedom? With Lard Scranton.
Project Freedom.
And they made the comment. The announcer made the comment, every time that Steve and Evan Strong come on, we're jammed, without exception. And lo and behold, we went off about 6 times and had to get us back on again, without exception. And we're the only people who do that. We've been on other Skype where they said, this has never happened before. Said, yes, but you're dealing with us now. We are constantly jammed, and we're always worried. But I know you've got upmarket equipment, and they may not be able to jam you. But we've gone 34 minutes without a problem.
I know.
This is unbelievable.
It's wonderful.
This is the first time we've actually gone this distance without a problem.
Fingers crossed.
Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Touch wood. Oh, no.
Luckily, we have a wooden desk.
Yeah. So, yes, we definitely know we're onto something because the people above us don't want us to know. And we know that we're actually, when we go into 2 national parks, they're looking for us.
Black helicopters.
Yeah, we've had black helicopters, the whole business. It sounds like it's out of the X-Files, but I wish it was because it isn't. So, yeah, we're onto something, and we know, and the elders are backing us, and that's why we won't back off, because they're telling us, yes, the Egyptians were here, yes, the Spanish were here, yes, the Phoenicians were here. In fact, Lars, James, when this gets out, every group was here, and the reason why the Australian government are so concerned about our work, and there is a reason for this, and it's not just because of the history. You see, Australia wasn't settled. It was stolen. No treaty was signed, and there was no legal right for the British to take this place. If we find out, the history tells us that the Egyptians were here for 4,300 years, which they were. The Spanish signed a treaty with the Githel, which they have to this day, that if the Phoenicians came here with agreement, then the British who came later actually have no right to be here legally, because other nations have acknowledged these people. Because what we did in Australia, we called this place terra nullius, which means there were people here, but they're unworthy of recognition and had no government and no form of nationhood. Well, what if the Spanish, and we know 2 captains, signed a treaty on a wallaby hide saying, and they were captains, Cook was a lieutenant, and they've signed a treaty in 1520. 250 years before Cook came. If the Egyptians were here, as they were for 4,500 years, what right do the British have to claim this place as theirs? And the answer is, in an international law, they have no right. They stole this through terra nullius, saying that the original people weren't a nation, but other nations came earlier and acknowledged them as a nation and worked in treaty. That's what worries them the most. There's a legal ramification for this. And right now, as we speak, the Australian government are trying to include the Aboriginal people into the Constitution. You may not know this, James, but the Aboriginal people have never been written into our Constitution. They still don't legally exist to this day.
Yeah.
Now, we're telling the Aboriginal people, don't sign, because once you sign, you lose your legal rights. And once they've signed, then no other country can then claim we had a treaty, because that's an acknowledgement that they're there. So we're trying to convince the Aboriginal people, don't be silly. You're about to prove that this is your nation. You belong to it, no one else. Now, the British are here now, and I'm sure they'll put up with us being here, but we need to get our ideas spun around.
Sorry, Steve. This is a good point to bring in Auntie Bev. Tell us who Auntie Bev is and how she fits into the story.
She's the person that we should all speak to. If you go on the country, you must go to the elder that is the custodian. Auntie Bev is the custodian. She is the person that sat on the old men and women. She tells us those stories all the time when she was 4 and 5, and they told her all the old stories and took her aside and gave her all the wisdom. Now, when this fuss with the glyphs started, as I said, for 3 years, I knew her for 3 years before one day she said, oh, by the way, the Egyptians did do it. I stood there stunned for about a minute and a half. I couldn't believe it. I said, but why didn't you tell me earlier? The timing wasn't right.
Yeah, that's how it works.
She has been initiated in the middle with 3 women. She danced for 3 days and 3 nights non-stop. Proper initiation the old way. Most of the people in New South Wales have never been initiated like that. She has people in the middle that are family also, and she's given stories and wisdom. She has the Song of the 4 Winds, which very few people in this country have. She knows the old ways. And when she tells us it's Egyptian, all of Australia should accept that, because she's the only one that would have had that information to begin with. The rest of us have been guessing. So from our point of view, her word in her country is law.
Wow. So, the thing is, this is not like a story that's got even a chance to get off the ground. It's not any chance for the research to get off the ground, because this has been put down from day one. This is a major censorship from ignorance. It's a censorship by ignorance, if I might be bold to say. No academia has actually challenged this or got involved in this, have they?
Academia being involved.
Oh, look.
No academics in terms of archaeologists from mainstream Australian universities, or?
They're aware of what we're doing, but they ignore us. They won't get near us with a 10-foot pole. I can tell you, we have some of the top academics in the country. We have professors from Sydney Uni that are advising us behind the scenes, but they won't put their name up because they know they get slammed like we do. We do have a lot of academics that are actually backing us quietly, but mainstream, no. But James, you've got to remember, the academics in this country, and I'm going to give you an example, I'm going to name him. I don't mind doing that. The so-called expert on Aboriginal astronomy in this country is a guy called Dwayne Hamacher. Now, at one stage we were in contact with him, but it wasn't going to work out, and I'll tell you why, because we read his work. And one of his pieces of work was this, and this shows you why we don't want to work with archaeologists. He said that he read a dreaming story. That's true. And then he worked out from that dreaming story a meteor strike had taken place and found it to within 10 meters just by reading the dreaming story. And he wrote that up, and all credit to him. I think it's wonderfully said that, because it gives you an integrity. It gives you an idea of the integrity of the dreaming story.
Tradition,
yeah. How fastidious it is that you could find it within 10 meters. But he had a problem, James, a big problem. The meteor strike occurred 1.5 million years ago. So what did he do? He had 2 choices. He could go and ask the elders for an explanation, or he could do what a white fella does and rationalize something. So he chose to rationalize them. This is what he said. He said, the original people walked past that hole and deduced that was a meteor strike and then made a story around that. I remember telling Auntie Bev that, and I'd never heard her swear before, but she started to, and she wanted to meet this person. Yeah. She wanted to meet this person and have a piece of him. As she said, we don't lie, we don't make up. Our stories about what we see and what we know, not what we think, only what we know. We only pass on the truth. We don't pass on opinions. What he needed to work out was, and he had to change his frame of reference and stop thinking like a white fella. If the original people told us a story about a meteor hitting somewhere to within 10 meters 1.5 million years ago, he's going to have to get used to the idea they may have seen it and passed it on. Now, that's the problem we have in Australia. He's supposed to be the best we've got, but he didn't go and see the elders. And that's the issue, you see. We have a reputation now for always going to see the elders. The academia in this country have a reputation for virtually never going to see the elders.
Another good example of this kind of academic tunnel vision would be another guy I work with showed a little out-of-place object, to the local archaeologist or whatever, and this archaeologist wouldn't look at it, just said, "Oh, it's a worm casting."
Oh.
And it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And you took photos over to New Zealand because
I took
it has
it to New Zealand.
a Maori islander kind of feel.
Tongue sticking out. I took it to every museum and every university in New Zealand, and they all said this is too fine and too detailed for any Pacific Islander, anyone, any Maori. They couldn't have done this. It's too artistically beyond their skills. From Australia, it was called worm castings.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives you a feel for what we're dealing with in Australia. As I said, welcome to the flat earth. This is where it is. That's why, as much as we'd like to, we are bringing an archaeologist on next time. He's in his last year, but he's very open. He's been talking to us for years, and he's in his final paper, I think. And I did 3 years archaeology at uni anyway. We can't bring those sort of people on because the elders won't talk to them anymore because they've created so much damage in this country. They don't trust any of them. Give you a very good example, James. Did you know the Aboriginal people had bows and arrows?
No, but I tell you what, I was watching something last week, and I meant to say this to you last time we spoke, Stephen. There's Egyptian boomerangs in the British Museum, and it's like they actually, when I was in Cairo, they have like an Egyptian boomerang alongside an Australian boomerang. Like it's an anomaly that can be explained away just by some cultural coincidence, like, you know. But like now that just really kind of rings bells off in my world, like, you know, from the research that you guys are doing.
Did you also know that if you look at those boomerangs, there are people around here that recognize them as their tribe? Because you see, when you've got to remember that Aboriginal art, original art is regional. You can have Papunya art, you can have Mimi art, you can have X-ray art, and it belongs to a region. People have recognized the boomerang and say, that's our mob, that's our mob. We know that. The original people know that too. And as I said, they were in this country from 4,700 years to 400 years ago. We actually know when they left and why they left. And I was told this by another elder. And that's why I can say this, because when the elders tell me this sort of stuff, you see that the proper elders don't lie about culture. They'd be killed for that. Their spirits would kill them outright. And they believe that, and so do I. He told me what happened. 400 years ago, they were still coming to this country, just before Cook came. And some priests came from Egypt, but they're not the same priests that we have, you know, around Isaiah times. They're different priests, of course. And when they went to the middle, because if you come to Sydney, you get taken to the middle. If you go to Gosford, you go up north. They stole 4 rocks. So the men tracked them all the way back to Balmoral, which is a beach in Sydney. And when they got to that beach, they speared them in front of the people on the boat and told them never to come back, because they've broken the law. So this Egyptian link is a lot greater than anyone even begins to think. We have pyramids all over Australia, James. Some are being destroyed as we speak. We know that the main roads department are going to put a great big road through the Gympie Pyramid. I've seen pyramids in the bush. There's nothing fancy or unusual about that. All this Egyptian stuff we've seen. We've seen an ankh that's over 10,000 years old engraved into Aboriginal rock engravings. And it is an ankh, and it's got the footprint of an ibis alongside it, which is the sign of Thoth. And you know that Thoth carries an ankh. So the Egyptian story is actually an Australian story that's been sent out to other places. We believe the original people were the first mariners and sailed out to the rest of the world and gave them religion, culture, art, and the hallmarks of the civilization we look upon today. We believe it all comes from here.
Wow, you know, it's mind-blowing. The whole thing's just mind-blowing. You know, just for the listeners, guys, I know we chatted about this last time. I think this is a key important point to bring up. But we spoke about the tobacco and cocaine mummies of Egypt, and this is key because we have evidence of the Egyptians somehow having some sort of contact with the South American civilizations, or continent, I should say, because tobacco and cocaine has turned up in DNA samples of the hair of mummies. And there was a German archaeologist who pretty much got crucified in a career sense in academia because of her findings. And she was only following the evidence.
Yes, we know where she's going. Yes, I feel sorry for her already.
I do, and the thing is, in the end, she was proved right. And did she get an apology? No. All Egyptologists did, after all their slating and career onslaught that they brought upon her, they said maybe there's some rudimentary contact.
What's rudimentary contact when you're about 7,000 k's away? I don't know how that becomes rudimentary. That's sophisticated. James, we can even tell you how they got there, because an elder, I've been given proper ceremony by an elder, a Ramangeri elder, and Evan knows him too. This guy is really into the old ways. He is as old ways you'll ever get. He told me how they got to there, how they got to Australia, and it's the same way they got to South America. What they did, according to him, and I know it's right, is they sailed down the east coast of Africa, they point their boat towards Australia, and they surfed the roaring 40s. And the first place you hit is Kangaroo Island, where the Ramangeri are, and they've got artifacts down there they're going to show us. And they can keep going past there and make their way across to South America. You've got to get on 40 degrees latitude, and for about 4 or 5 months of the year, the wind just blows in one direction. All you've got to do is point the sail in the right direction and just get off at Kangaroo Island if you want, go to Sydney if you want, or keep going. And we believe that's how they started. We're pretty sure the Egyptians started sailing the roaring 40s, and that's an easy way to get to a place quickly. And that's how, if you check with sailors today, that's what they surf when they get from Australia to South America. If it's going the right way, you can get there quickly. And we have no doubt the Egyptians did that. In fact, the elders have told us just that. That's the way they made it. The Egyptian story, as you said, they went everywhere. They were encouraged to go everywhere, and they settled in quite a few places. And what we can tell you too is the reason why you're finding the cocaine and you're finding all this stuff is because our understanding is for quite some time, these Egyptians who came, they fitted in. They didn't behave like the Spanish, who were only here for about 20 years. The Portuguese actually were wiped out before they even got off the boat here, weren't they?
Yeah, no, that ended very
They
quickly.
weren't welcome. And the French were kicked out of La Perouse because they raped a woman. But I think the Egyptians came here for spiritual manna. They came here to learn the wisdoms of the gods, because these guys were the relayers of that. And they behaved with dignity. The Egyptians are spoken of very highly around here. In fact, we know for an absolute fact, because I've been on this site, James. I've been on a site, it's an ancient rockway. It's massive, and it was made by Egyptians. The rocks are cut, and there's no percussion points there. And I know for a fact, original people carried out rites of passage on top of an Egyptian construct. That gives you a clue how closely this liaison between the Egyptians and the original people were. If the original people are going to do sacred ceremonies where boys become men on top of something that was made with a metal blade, and the original people don't have metal, it was Egyptian. I have no doubt about that. That shows you that this wasn't an invading force coming to occupy and steal like normally is the case and take the gold. Well, there's none here anyway. They came here for something a lot different, for the wisdom of the ages and the reason why we're here. That's what they came for, and they were welcomed. And that's the important part of that story that poor woman was trying to get across. The Egyptians did this differently than the other colonizers. They came with respect. They didn't come to subjugate. They came to learn and share. And that's part of the story we haven't done yet.
Sure. I can't see any difference between them both going to South America or about going to Australia. You're crossing an ocean. You had to have an ocean-going vessel. It's a no-brainer for me. I mean,
it's 6.5 that year. It's the same thing, isn't it? If you can sail, you're sailing a great expanse between South Africa to the start of Australia. You're doing 3,500 k's, 4,000 k's. You want to do it again? Well, you already can, can't you? You stop in Australia, refuel, wait for maybe a year until the winds are blowing the same way, then move on. It's that easy to do, and there's no way they didn't do it. No way at all.
Sure. Take a minute, guys, to give us at the Facebook page and the web page for you guys on your websites and your material.
You'll get Evan to do that. That's electronics again. I've still got him ahead.
Okay, so the website is forgottenorigin.com, and we've got Egyptians in Australia, which is on our YouTube channel, and
Facebook.
And Facebook, yeah, there's Stephen and Evan Strong. There's a Facebook page for us, and then there's a bit of a Facebook group called Forgotten Origin as well.
Which I am a member of, and I love to see the posts. But, yeah, I have to say your website, forgottenorigin.com, has got a wealth of material on it, and it's great to see that. It really is. You can catch the Red Ice show on there. You have it embedded as well. Wow, is there any other places then that have Egyptian hieroglyphs to the same scale as the Kariong glyphs, or are they randomly dotted about, or?
Randomly, look, we've found two. One everyone knew about, the second one. We know of a third one in the same area. We know that it actually exists, and we've got a pretty good idea where it is, and we've spoken to people who've seen it. So yes, down in Kariong, we have lots of inscriptions, some by them, some more ancient. But there is another site, the one we're working with up here, where we also know, in fact, the guy that originally did this in 1939, because this site was only available for 8 months before it was destroyed. And we had the actual president of the Australian Archaeological Society at the time working on this. And he was adamant the Egyptians came here also and were part of this, and were part of what was taking place there. Now there, what we're finding is Egyptian constructs like walls and paths. We're finding that. We also found a lot of walls in Kariong too. Now remember, all of these walls and paths had to be made with either metal or laser. There's no percussion points, there's no percussion bulbs, there's nothing to show rock on rock technology. But we're seeing 90-degree angles all over the place. We know the Egyptians were building here. What we also found is that we think we found what the first language is. And the first language is not actually, it's also got glyphs. I've got to make that point. The glyphs are part of the first language, but what people don't know is the first language, and this is, by the way, what the professor, the president of the Australian Archaeological Society said, not us, in 1939. This first language, he believes, is up where we are. It's got about 200 different components. This guy was counted up 28,000 words and was still working on it when the Australian government stepped in, as they tend to do, and destroyed the whole thing. But it's got 10 elements, 7 senses, 16 alphabet letters, 21 body parts, 38 hand signs, over 100 animal signs, about 30 suffixes, prefixes and stuff. And it's got lots of glyphs there. Now, these glyphs are cruder, aren't they? They're much simpler.
Yeah.
And I think that's to be expected. But here's the rub with this one. Is what's really funny, James, is the glyphs weren't giving most of the language. Most of the language was given in the shapes of the rocks, and we've got them. We've seen them. We've got 7-sided rocks, all perfectly flat sides. We've seen 3-sided rocks, and these rocks, when you move them around, have different meanings. And we had an elder who took us up with one of the rocks and showed us 7 different meanings, and we just stood there with our mouth open. He asked us to pick the spot because it was a capstone. It was one of the major parts of the 181 stones. And from that, he told us that points to where we came from. And I asked him, well, which month would that be in so I can find out? He said, you have to find out for yourself. He pointed out all these different things. These 181 stones, just by the way they're cut and the way they're placed, makes a language. That's much harder than a glyph. It's much harder than a letter. You've got to memorize the angles and the lines. So what we're seeing, and what this guy said, is the first language doesn't come out of words, it comes out of numeration and patterns and number. And that's what we're seeing there. It's a crossover. You've got angles, numbers, because the gods can also represent numbers. I can't say the words because I actually know the ancient words, and they're the first words ever spoken, if we're right, and the original people swear they are. And don't forget, that's what Arnie Bebb said earlier too. and we took Auntie Bev up to this site because we had to, because it was part of that.
Mm-hmm.
This language is a fascinating language, James, because of one really important point. If you read the books about the first language, they'll tell you it's the simplest emotions, needs, animals, spears, fire, basic emotions. When you read the translation, because Slater in 1939 claimed he had with him a person that could read that language, the ancient language, and he made a mistake in his work. He said there's none left. He's the last. Well, he's wrong. We had one that came out, and believe me, he's not the last, and this guy did some amazing things. But this language has got so many components to it, and it is so refined. I'll just give you one quote from the most often used phrase in the whole of the translation. This was done in 1939 when no one even knew about UFOs. It goes like this: guided by truth, man came to earth through darkness from a light that shines far off. Now that word came to earth, I could read that to you in about 7 translations. Man came to earth with all 7 senses developed. Note that, 7. Not the ones we've got, but 7.
Sure.
The truth came to earth on wings. It repeats itself. And what's important is that's the president of the Australian Archaeological Society talking about people coming to earth in 1939 when I don't think he fully understood what he's writing, but he had to write what he was told. And those messages came from just the way the rocks were cut and arranged. Now, that is what I call an intelligent, sophisticated language. And when you read, the whole story is about reaching the divine breath of God. The whole thing is about that. And then you read what we write today in the mainstream press, and we think we've ascended. I've got some bad news for us. We have fallen into a plummeting heap, and we're right at the bottom, about to rise up.
Mm-hmm.
Because what those people were talking about then, about the river of life, and the way they spoke, it was so esoteric. And what we think we have here, James, is the place up here is a very esoteric statement, and it's called the mystery track of life, isn't it, Evan?
Yeah.
The track of life. It's the history of the whole of humanity, according to Slater. He said it forms the basis of all knowledge that is, has been, and will come to pass. That's his comment, not mine, and he's the top academic at the time. This is a sublime place. When you go down to Kariong, I think they thought, I think the people that come aren't going to get it. Let's make it simpler. Let's scribble it up, word for word, symbol for symbol. If they don't get it through the rock arrangement, surely they'll get it through the glyphs. And guess what? We've got them both in Australia, and we've got neither at the moment. So they needed to put something even simpler.
Perhaps some sort of neon sign. I don't know.
Well, we got one of those too. Yeah. So it's an interesting story, James. It's still developing.
It is still developing. I think that's the key thing. It's still developing, guys. You know. And by the way, I thank you kindly for the article you sent. I didn't get to comment on it until probably now, but you sent me an article. Is this the world's oldest star map? And obviously, the astronomy is the stuff that I love, guys. And wow, this is very convincing. This is the key thing for me now. This is where it gets interesting for me, because archaeoastronomy is a very powerful tool. Tell me also about when I was watching ancient Egypt in Australia, I think it's called. I can't remember the name of the YouTube shows, but there's a solar wheel there. This is the key thing now, guys. There's a solar wheel there with basically a circle with the cardinal points of north, south, east, and west, and the points in between. This was something the Dogon used, and something that ancient Ireland used as well in the megalithic civilization. These solar wheels were a key thing to the Dogon. We're a black race, by the way. They say that the megalithic builders may have been a black race as well. There's mythology talking about a black race of people coming to build the megaliths as well. So yeah, this all ties in with the Pleiades, with the Dogon, and I want you to kind of mention Laird. I know you've just had a show at Laird Scranton, and this is where it gets super interesting now. And I think what Laird has done for the Dogon is key importance, and I know you guys are going to tie in with him. So maybe just bring in Laird's work and what you guys think of Laird. And
to be honest, Evan, we came into the Dogon. I was forced into it, wasn't I?
Yeah, he's kind of like a retired academic lecturer, he kind of said, no, you guys need to start thinking about the Dogon. And through his insistence, we kind of went, oh, okay, let's have a look.
So we walked in this one. We walked in this one very gingerly, and we did write a chapter about it, which is, I think it's in Shun. Yeah,
Yes.
There's a chapter about it in Shun. But we're 101s in this. When we talk to Laird, we really aren't in the same ballpark as him. But what we did find out is I started thumbing through, when we had one of our many breakdowns when we're doing this show, I started thumbing through the back of his book. It blew me away. I couldn't believe it, because all the bits I couldn't work out, he's got the meanings for it. And it fits in perfectly. Our narrative is correct. We got the general story, but what we're going to do is we spoke some more about this. We're going to actually work so that when we're going back down, and I'll talk about the astronomy after that, because we're mainly going down to do astronomy, which I know you're going to like. But I want to spend some time with people using these electronic things. We're going to send across the pictures of the sections which we've seen are in the same book, and they've opened me up because a lot of it is about bending, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bending gravity, bending the earth. And I didn't know those signs were there. And we know there's a portal above that actually does bend that. So we're really taken by that. So what we're going to do is when we're there in about 3 weeks, we're going to send stuff across to him, and we're going to work together and see if we can do a shared translation of that, because I know that we were in the general ballpark and we just did it as thematic. I think you'll know in that book we've done it. We looked as themes. We didn't want to put of, the, and verbs what other people have done, because I think that's ridiculous. We tried to keep it down to basic themes. But what Laird has given us is some extensions of those themes that we didn't see.
The nuances.
Yeah. Some amazing stuff about bending gravity and stuff that we didn't see before.
Oh yeah, I mean, in fairness, like, I mean, Laird, you can either look at Laird stuff as out there, or you can look at it as well researched and, you know, sophisticated. Because, and like you say, like, I mean, Laird has the skills. He is a computer programmer that writes languages. If anybody's going to understand cryptic languages, it's going to be Laird Scranton, because of his skill set. And what you might think that initially from the outset, why is somebody a computer programmer looking at hieroglyphs? But he's the guy that's going to do this. Like, and like I say, what I do is I'm a systems analyst. I look at the ancient megaliths as a system of mystery, a system of logistics of moving stone, a system of astronomy, a system of acoustics. And it's people outside the field, guys, sometimes look in and give you insight, you know. And not to draw a par with myself and Laird in any way, Laird is prolific in what he does. Like, you know, he has really gone for the jugular on this. And he's pretty much, you know, tied the sophistication of the Dogon with ancient Egypt, you know, and basically, you know, it's the Dogon are synonymous with ancient Egypt, and that's what you cannot. That's the number one thing you should take away with Laird's work, regardless of what is the context. The Dogon are synonymous with ancient Egypt.
Well, you know, we've got a suspicion here, James. We actually believe, because the original people, we believe that when the other civilizations fell away, the original people decided to give away all technology, eschew everything, and just go back to being naked hunter-gatherers and living with the land. We actually believe, I'm starting to believe this slowly, but I actually believe the Dogons, being more of a sort of semi-hunter-gatherer sort of nature, were even more in contact and more closer to the truth than the Egyptians were. Because once you start settling and placing yourself in a farming situation where you're competing against nature, I've been with original people. When I go onto sites, if I don't have an original person, I start calling out and clapping and explaining to the spirits exactly why I'm there and what I'm doing. And some white fellas said, why are you doing that? I said, because they're listening. They know they're there. They're in the land. Well, the Dogon, I think their contact with the land was slightly stronger. I tend to feel like maybe the Egyptians got it from the Dogons, who got it from the original people, rather than, I tend to feel the more I'm looking at the Dogon. And plus also, there are so many of those things in this book he's got there, which are exact copies of what's between the walls. Yeah. They're ones that aren't in any of the Egyptian glyphs, anything we've got. And I keep thinking, how can he have so many exact copies? And the word where they're put in, I know where they go, and they are definitely in context. I know where these glyphs are. I virtually know the whole of these walls back to front in my head. I've been there so many times. And every one of Laird's ones that he's given there fits perfectly into the narrative. But then sometimes I see this bending of gravity and bending of space and time, which we didn't know about. We suspect it because of what's above there. He's given some nuances. I think it's going to make a much, I mean, I shouldn't say that because we just put out a book called Ancient Aliens in Australia, and we put a translation there, which is 85% right for anyone that wants to get it. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
But I think we've said we'll get closer to 95%, even closer, because I know the ones he's got are ones I couldn't get. That's what I was so excited about. And then there's one there.
Sorry, Stephen. Is there a triple water wave? Did we talk about that? Does a triple water?
Yeah, we did. He spoke about it too. I brought it up.
We definitely brought that up.
The triple water wave there. Yes, it does stand for mu. I was correct, and I called it was mu too, but it also has another meaning. And oh my God,
You just found another one.
oh no, he's signed for DNA. Oh man, I don't believe this. I just seen this. He's got DNA double helix. We've got 5 of those on the wall.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that next. So I'm trying to access Laird's book in my head. I read them for.
Oh, look, we should be doing this. I'm actually reading his book, doing a radio commentary. But I got to tell you now, I can tell you that the DNA helix we've got on the walls, and one of them, we have a shaft that splits it in half, goes right through the middle of it. And below it is the laboratory. I know what that means, but that backs me up even more. We thought that was DNA. Here it says it's DNA helix. And it's the same way. Yeah, we've got to get him on site. So look, for those people who want to get the other book, it's pretty good. But actually, James, we're really careful about this. One of the other things archaeologists do is when they put out a paper, they stand by it religiously and they won't back off. We really embrace error. We've been publicly, more than once, we got it wrong, but now we know better. We've learned something else. And that's the way people should do this, you know. We're talking about the wisdom of the gods here.
My father always said to me, a man who never made a mistake never made anything. That's an old Irish proverb.
I like that.
I'm going to remember that. If that's the case, we're doing okay.
You know, and that's true, you know, and that's a good philosophy. You know, you can always aim for perfection, but it's okay if you've made a mistake, you know, because once you start teaching people it's not okay to make a mistake, scientific dogma is the end of the day, you know, that's where you'll end up. Guys, tell me about Klaus Donner, because you've been working with Klaus Donner as well, and I've been meaning to get Klaus on the show, and he's an interesting guy. He loves this stuff. He loves the anomalies and the ancient antiquity and all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. And I mean, I can see why you're working with Klaus Donner, but for the audience that are listening that aren't familiar with Klaus, tell us the involvement with Klaus and what's happening there.
Klaus started making contact because Klaus, as you know, is very much into rigor and science. That's his catch. And we were attracted to that to begin with. We always have been. We knew about him before he knew about us. He found out about us and started to find out what we're doing. We've become quite close. We speak often, sometimes 4 or 5 times a week, when he's not wandering around the world, which he does all the time. He's like a godfather of left-wing archaeology history. I love the bloke. Well, what he did was, he knew we were working on Kariong, and we won't go into the full details why, because he got access to technology that we don't want miners to get, and we don't want others to get, and he could see into the earth. And he directed us to a site. And when we first heard that, we thought, I love the bloke, but oh, this is really pushing a bit. We'll see what happens. So we went to this site, which I think we've written, and it's in a magazine called Wake Up World. And for people who want to look at it, you'll see the actual pictures of this place.
Yeah, there's some pretty good
And I know
pictures.
you've seen them, James. I'm pretty sure you've had a look at these pictures. He told us to go to the most incredibly difficult site to walk at. No white fella's ever been there, I swear to you. It's dangerous as anything to get to. I'm going back in 3 weeks, and already I'm scared of it. Because if I miss my jump, and you've got to jump 2 meters to land into a pivot, into a one spot where the foot can go, then you've got to spin back up the hill, and if you don't, you're going to roll down 100 meters. It is so hard to get to. We're happy to talk about it quite openly and say it's somewhere in gospel. We don't care because I'll never find it. That's what makes it even more convincing. When we got inside there, you'll see in the article, we found 19.77 meters of wall. And that wall comes straight out of South America. I swear to you, it's the same.
Yeah, we can get a paper in between.
You can't get a paper between the joins. And what was really interesting, sorry.
Yeah, I've been to Peru, guys. It's crazy when you look at the Peruvian walls when you can't get a sheet of paper between it. As an engineer and a scientist, I went with an engineer as well. The two of us were sitting there with our jaws dropped, because Sacsay Woman, for example, in above Cusco, it's the most complex, biggest jigsaw in the world. Like, you know, it's like one stone is like 120 tons with like 11 or 7, 9 sides on it and stuff, like, you know, interlocking into the next one. But, you know, mind bending, like, but, yeah, I mean, that, yeah, if you got a wall like that, like, that's going to be pretty
Well,
sick.
they're not supposed to be there. They're not supposed to be there. And yeah, look, the things that blew me away was this. There are 4 walls, and one goes around both sides, and we can see mortar. And the base walls, which are all horizontal, 180 degrees, 190, 190, 189, the 3 bases. I thought, well, that's interesting. Nature's really repeating itself here. That's an unusual one. Then you measure the walls. And the first 2, which we think are the main walls that lead into the tunnel, 292 and 293. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, no, that's not right. That's too cold. And then you look at the walls themselves and you can see in some cases, because what you've got is hundreds of tons of rock from above pushing in this, and it's collapsing the whole thing. It's falling apart. There are rocks falling out of the roof that are perfectly cut with straight lines and 90 degrees everywhere. There are 90 degrees and straight lines all over the place. And there's a problem with that, James. And the problem is this. On a 45-degree slope, with a massive rock from above pushing down, that should not be a straight crack. They should crack according to the force above them. The force above them is not coming at 90 degrees. It's coming at a different angle. All of the cuts are straight. It can't happen. And what we found is we know there were tunnels there. Klaus wasn't interested in the walls. I was. There are tunnels there. There's more there, which we can't talk about on the radio right now because we're trying to see if we can actually find our way in, and we think we can. I won't talk about what's in there, but if we find what Klaus says is in there, nobody, no scientist on the planet will be able to dismiss it. We're hoping we're going down in 3 weeks to see if we can get in. I'm not going to say how we think we found a back entrance, but we may have.
Sorry, guys, I just want to jump in. What can people do to help? Because I think you guys could do with some resources, or backing, or a petition, or something like. I mean, is there anything that people can do to help?
What a fantastic question for us. James, this is our story. We've got about 20 volunteers who've been working with us now for the last 3 years. And we've had guys that have flown from Darwin, they've come from the Snowy Mountains, and they've spent thousands of dollars of their time, and they've been off work. We pay them nothing. We've got no money. Mm-hmm. Just recently, we had a couple of people who made a donation to pay for it. This is why we're racing down straight away to get us started. We aren't funded by anyone, and that's important, and we don't want to be. Because if we are, if there's a university involved, they'll stick their nose in. We don't want them. We want to keep away from the government and everywhere. Yes, we are at the stage if people can help us financially, because look, you take what we're doing this time. I've got a guy that's coming down from Darwin, another person from the Snowy Mountains. We've got to fly 800, 900 Ks to get down there. It costs us money. I've flown down there probably 15 times. Evan's missed out on about 5 or 6 trips because we just didn't have the money. Because our wife is an artist, has to pay for both of us. Think about that, James, an artist paying for us, for riders. So you look, if people would like to help us financially, we would love it. We would give them all the receipts and stuff like that because we don't make profit out of this. But yeah, we do need help because we have a list of sites. In fact, we've actually, because once this has started, it's like the whole of Australia have got sites they ring us up with. We've got about 6 people on back burners, and we keep saying, look, we'll get round to you, but we can't afford to go. So if people feel like they want to help us, well,
or buy our books,
anything, it would help us, because if you buy our books, that means.
Yeah, I think being able to collaborate with Laird Scranton is going to really help you anyway. And I know you can do that via email or Skype, or that's certainly going to help, and it's going to open things up.
James, can I share with you the thing that we really focused on, which is I wanted to talk about before, which is astronomy. That's what we're going to spend most of our day on. And let me explain why, because this is for us where we really want to focus. As you know, we now have a star chart. It's the oldest in Australia. It's 4,600 years old. It's the only one that's been mapped. The 28, 29 star markers directly above the glyph is the only one that's been mapped. But ladies and gentlemen, we've counted 3,500. There's one rock platform we're working on. We've marked out 182. And we've still got over 600 to mark in on that rock platform alone. My point is this, and it's a logical point. If the only set of star markers they've found represent the night sky 4,600 years ago or older.
Which is the same time the Egyptians were supposed
Same
to be
time the
there.
Egyptians were there. What do the other ones mark out? If one does that, can't others? And the answer's got to be yes. Now, we know in Australia, the oldest astronomical device in the world is in Australia. That's Wurdi Yuan, which is marking out the solstice, and that's between 10 to 20,000 years old. We know from the only book written on astronomy in Australia by Hugh Cairns called Dark Sparklers, he said they knew about the stars 30,000 years old, from 30,000 years ago or older. But what about if we've got star charts there that are 30,000 years? And I think we do. I think we've got a star map here. We call that one platform the map of the universe. It's just our way of calling it because there's 800 markers there. There is no accumulation of star markers anywhere in the world as clustered as this. And they're obsessed. In fact, the elders always say to us, when we ring, a lot of the elders always finish with the same line. Evan, you say it. Go on, what do they say?
As above, so below.
Or as on top, so below.
Yeah, I researched Hugh Cairns myself, and he researched Newgrange and that, and he's from New Zealand, was he?
Yeah, he's from around our way, and he was the only person that spoke to the elders and asked them. And then he learned something fascinating. The original people don't take much interest in the stars. This is very important. They are interested in the dark spaces. Now, I find that fascinating, mate. We've just discovered dark spaces 50 years ago. We could have this mob talking about it 30,000 years ago. Talk about getting there late. This is what they were interested in. They talk about the dark spaces where their souls go when they wait to reincarnate. They're way above us here. And we're thinking dark spaces. Oh, yeah, we know about them. Yeah, they knew about them well before we did. That's their interest. So when they put down the star markers, don't look so much at the star markers. Look at the shapes it creates, because that's how they see the night sky. We look at the bright lights. They look at the dark shapes. Different mindset coming here. Different people coming from a different place. And James, you must remember one thing in this country. It's not Australia 200 years ago. It is 500 separate nations. The same way you don't call Italy Europe, do you?
Exactly.
Until I came here, there were 500 different languages, 500 different tribes, and each of those tribes had their own dreaming stories. For example, if I am, say I'm Gamilaroi, I can't walk on Bunja, I can't walk on any other country, be it Weebol, be it Yagal, any other country, because the spirits made that country. It's not mine. I don't know their stories. It's got nothing to do with me. But in this country, there is one dreaming story that goes to every tribe. The Pleiades, the Seven Sisters. It's the only story that transcends every boundary in this country. You go to WA, the Seven Sisters. You come to our place, anywhere you want to go. They all know about the Seven Sisters, and they all know about Pleiades. We have elders who tell us straight out our ancestors come from Pleiades. They've no doubt about that. And that's the reason we're doing this. If you look at our first three books, we never mentioned this stuff.
Just the same as Dogon, though, Stephen. These guys are talking about the Pleiades and the originator gods. That's where they came from. And every ancient culture in the world, it's always the Pleiades are what they call mythology. I don't like actually calling it Dogon mythology. I think it's an insult to them. It's their history. To us, it's mythology. And it's like insulting them, saying, well, that's not real because we don't believe it's real. So we're going to call it mythology, not history. So, it's like, I call it Dogon history, and I try to correct people on that. Like, to them, it's their history. And the thing is, they have an oral history just like the native Australians, like.
They do. And that oral history, you know what this is about, James? It's this horrible, and it's a racist term, the Chinese whispers term. Do you know how the story changes all the time? I sat with some Ramangeri elders, four of them, when they were deciding a word that was going to be pronounced. This was a new word. I watched them for 20 minutes argue over how that word was going to be said, its relationship to other words that were there, and it took about 20 minutes before they finally come to a shared agreement. Now, that means from that point on, forever, without exception, that will never change, and that's something we have got to get our head around. You see, the original people, remember what I said that every tribe has their own spirit that makes them.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, if I want to fight with that tribe, I can't go on their land. I'll never walk on their land because that spirit will kill me outright. You see what this does, James? It means that nobody can invade another person's property, take their goods, their chattels, anything else you want. You can't do that. So what they also do, as you know, when the invader invades, they rewrite history to sanitize their horrific acts. In this country, nobody invades. The history's never been sanitized. It's never been changed. And when a boy first gets his first cut, he memorizes syllable for syllable a dreaming story. And if he gets it wrong, they might break a knuckle to teach him a lesson to get it right. I watched a video clip of Possum Jackal Jarrah, one of our greatest Aboriginal painters, and they call him the painter. Yeah, he sits there and paints, but his cousin stands above him and points and says, put that dot there. Everything they do has been passed on from generation to generation to generation, just like the Dogong. And you're right, James, that is history. What we have today in our books is mythology. What they have is the true history.
And the thing is, sorry, Stephen, and the thing is about the Dogon history is there's so many checkpoints, and Laird talks about this, and so does Shannon Doria. There's so many checkpoints in the Dogon history, their story, when they orate their history. There's so many checkpoints that it can't be corrupted. It can't become fluid and change because the story doesn't make sense. It's constantly checking in with itself. I have conversations with Ogo Tameli there. It's sometimes a difficult read. So is the Pale Fox and some of the other Dogon material. But the thing is, Marcel Grial and Germain Dieterlen, even these guys, these two titans in the day of anthropology who documented the Dogon stuff, they didn't even get their They got it. They call it mythology. They didn't get it. Their mythology. They didn't get it, and that's maybe a good thing, because they just documented it really well. But the key thing is that there's so many checkpoints in the story that it corroborates itself, that it can't be conflicted or it's constrained to its original concept.
That's a very good point too. And remember too, James, I think you know this, that I think one of the daughters said, but neither of these guys actually got the ceremony. Until you get the ceremony, there was things they couldn't give them, the same way in Australia. Until I got ceremony, proper ceremony, where I had to hold a special stick and I was sung at and told things. Until you get that ceremony, all you will get is the 101 version when the student first comes in, the golden book version of the simplest version of the story. The intricacy and the esoteric part of this story can't be given until you're given ceremony. Now, I've only been given one ceremony, and my elders called me back to get another one. Now, when I know I get that, I'll be given more, and I've got an idea what it is. But I can't say it yet. Because if I said aloud what it could be, I would never get that ceremony. They're that strict. As you just said, there are checks and balances where nobody can mess up that story. And if they do, they're immediately picked up straight away. This is a society, this is why we're becoming so involved with the Dogon, because we do believe it's not the Egyptians, the Dogons were the closest link in relation to keeping that integrity. That story, those guys could be given all that they could be given, the same way when we walk onto other sites. Like if I go on up here where we are at the moment, I haven't been given the ceremonies here. I'll be given some information, but I can't be given all because I didn't get ceremony here. The same for them. They would have been given what the kids were given before their very first cut, but after that first cut, maybe a little bit of it, but not much. And for the second cut, none of it. So the Dogon, just like the original people, are really the intellectual aristocrats of not just the primitive age or the old age, they are the intellectual aristocrats of all ages.
So, guys, do you guys meet any confrontations with academics in Australia, or is it just ignorance?
Both.
Yeah, column A and column B.
We could tick both columns, and if we started talking about that, we'd probably have to do another 3 or 4 shows. We have been attacked. I've been attacked basically for being an aging hippie, for smoking mushrooms, for God's sake. The poor peasant doesn't know you can't smoke mushrooms. We've been attacked mercilessly for everything bar the information we give out.
Yeah, to focus on about that.
Look, I lived in Nimbin. I am an aging hippie, and yes, I probably have some of the worst habits that hippies have. I'm not going to hide that, and I'm quite happy to be called that. But that's been a major one. We've been attacked mercilessly for my appearance, my age, Evan's what do you call it? Cohort, aren't you?
No, I'm called Junior Strong.
Oh, that's right. And all our helpers are called cohorts. We've had some.
Never had
It's
cohorts
quite hilarious.
before.
We sit down sometimes and read all the stuff. My wife can't read it. She gets so angry because there's so many shocking things written about us. And it's quite interesting because we've actually had a book written about us, calling us everything under the sun, and they put out videos flagging us.
Wow. Wow. Well, look, guys, I commend you on what you've done. I really do. And we're coming up to the end of the show. Is there anything else you want to tell us? Any other information we haven't rolled out or overlooked, or anything exciting that you're working on that we haven't touched on yet?
Well, there are a few, but look, we've found a port with probably 10,000 shaped stones, and none of them have been formed by rock. We found some amazing stuff. I could talk about that, but I'd like to finish with something completely different, James. It's about the fact that time for us is a linear straight line, but for original people it's circular, right? And I know the Dogon believe the same thing. They don't see time in a straight line. And it's this. We believe around about 6,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, up until that time, everyone was living under the precepts of the dreaming, which meant you couldn't take another person's property, you couldn't walk on another person's property. If you want to fight, you find an agreed place. There were real rules of engagement of how you behave to other people. Nobody ever invaded or took anything else. And original people don't have a word for stealing or lying. What a world it would be if nobody had in their vocab a word for stealing and lying. But then the lie starts. When we start settling and farming, then all of a sudden there's a division of labour. And some people have more than others. And then all the things that go with that. And then what we start to be told is, and we've been told this in the history books, I know because I'm a teacher, we learn history. And what do we study? Warfare, fighting. And we're told that we are basically aggressive, belligerent, warlike creatures. That must explain why 50 cents in every dollar on this planet is devoted to killing other humans through warfare and through other ways of doing it. That's a lie. This is a lie. Our heritage has been stolen. This is the truth. The original people and the Dogon and all these people, and I read the Standing Stones, I know what it says. We are supposed to be spiritual, cooperative, aware, esoteric beings. That is our heritage, and that's what we were. For the last 5,000 years, we've been lied to, and we now believe this is the natural order of things. No, the natural order of things for hundreds of thousands of years. Sure, the Pleiadians gave us an idea, and maybe the Syrians and others did, but we've been on that path for a long time. And the last 5,000 years has been a nightmare. It has been appalling. We've divided the world into have and have not. In original society, everyone was equal. In original society, everyone has a little bit of magic. That's the only thing you need to know. Nobody has more than anyone else, and every job is regarded equal. That's been stolen. That is our heritage. And I need to tell people when we do this, we're not just doing history. Yeah, of course, it's historic. But original history, Dogon history, is not in a straight line. Get your heads around it. It's in a circle. And the original people are telling us one thing. And you need to understand this, ladies and gentlemen. They're giving this up because they believe there's a massive change here. They don't talk about the Mayan calendars. They tell us the spirits are telling them from the land itself. The change will come. And the reason they want people to know about this is because this is where we've got to go back to. This is why this has been done. So yes, it's historic, but it's also, as Slater said when he looked at the Standing Stones, this contains all knowledge of what has been, what is, and what will be. That's what he was saying. And he's the top academic of the time, so why not use the man? Thank you for that. That's what we're trying to say to people. This is not just an interesting story about some blackfellas in Australia, maybe doing things a bit different. It's a history about what we were for hundreds of thousands of years. And then 5,000 years ago, it changed. And I think the original people thought that maybe Egypt could do it, that they could create a society that still wanted the dreaming, but was sedentary. And I think that was what was going on with Egypt, but it didn't work. As you know, over a period of time, it changed and they lost their way. But to begin with, I think they were close. And it gives us hope, doesn't it, James, that sedentary society could also live under the precepts of the dreaming. Mind you, we may need Osiris and Isis to guide us along a bit and force us away and lead us by the nose, but it tells us The Egyptians could do it. The Dogon is still doing it, and the original people are. It's not lost. It may well be forgotten. That's why we call it forgotten origins, but we never said it was stolen and lost. It's just been forgotten. The original people want to share it, and that's our job, to get it out.
Wow, that's a beautiful way to end the show, guys. You know, I commend you again on what you've done. The website is forgottenorigin.com, as is the Facebook group, and the YouTube channel again, Evan.
Yeah, just look for the Egyptians in Australia series, but our channel's the Forgotten Origins as well. So
it's all the same.
Yeah,
it's all the same. Beautiful, guys. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Any more developments, keep me posted. And you need any help with the astronomy or another bit of advice, I'm sure you have another astronomer or two knocking about. But if you need any help or any advice, I'd certainly love to look at any archaeoastronomy, and I look forward to what's going to be uncovered in the future. Like, this is a story we're going to have to keep our eyes on.
I'm going to take you up on that offer now, James, because we don't. We had a couple we thought about, and they didn't measure up. We only take people in this that actually get where we're coming from. And if they don't get where we're coming from, we tell them to leave. Yeah, we will keep in contact.
If you go to any sites and you see anything that you think is alignment, get a digital compass. They're only about $20. Like, they're not that. You can calibrate it every time by moving it in in a figure eight, and just get an accurate alignment as you can. Use a magnetic compass to back it up to make sure that you're taking the right reading. Use the digital compass. This is my skill set that I've learned. Use the digital one to get the accurate reading, but make sure the digital one's working by using the magnetic compass. And that way you don't have to use your eyes to read the magnetic compass, but you know the digital one's working. So it may seem a bit extravagant, but it's just a way of making sure you're doing things right. And get the GPS coordinates if you can of the location.
And what we will do, James, when we get these coordinates, we will send them to you, mate. Don't worry about that. That's what we're going to do.
Because I can check that from the astronomy at this end on the astronomy programs. You never know. I've been surprised, sometimes I've gone back to a site, guys, 2 or 3 times, and I'm twigging stuff on the 3rd time or the 4th time, and it's like, I didn't see that last time. And sometimes you get overwhelmed by it as well, and it just takes a bit of time.
Oh, yeah. We've done that many times. I actually looked at one site which was all the glyphs, and I was talking about it, and I took some people to it. I didn't see above it was a hole that was drilled straight into the wall that went in about probably 40, 50 centimetres, and it's about 2 centimetres by 2 centimetres. Yeah. I never saw it until someone picked it up on the YouTube. I've been there 5 times and never seen it. You have to keep going back. You're right. Yeah, definitely. We will share that with you, James, because
yeah, I look forward to that. I really do. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, guys. We'll leave it at that for now, and I look forward to see what's going to happen. And I'll be checking in on Facebook on Forgotten Origins because I love the posts that are coming up. And again, guys, I commend you what you've done. The book is Ancient Aliens in Australia, and you have a new one coming out called Shunned. Is that correct?
It's actually out in ebook form, and it will be coming out in print form in about a month. And that's actually written by us. And that's really all that science we've got on our website. We tried to put it into one book to give a base, and we try to encapsulate everything into that book. So it's sort of a coverage of what we've done.
And as for Ancient Aliens, you can get that from the website.
Yeah, they're both on our website. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I'm going to link that up on the YouTube description and the biography page on CapricornRadio.com. As I do all the guests, and we'll have links to the book links for Amazon and everywhere else. But pleasure having you on the show, guys. Great to talk to you.
Thank you.
At that point, and it's the only thing I use now out of all the different majors I did. But yeah, so I kind of the one that comes in and will kind of try to back up whatever theory or paradigms put forth. So I'll look for evidence where I can find it and draw it in from different disciplines, and I really enjoy that aspect of it, kind of as opposed to having maybe academic tunnel vision, kind of looking at different disciplines and bringing them all in together, because there's more connections than anyone realizes. So yeah, that's kind of my background to bring that aspect into it and help best I can.
How do you guys work together? Do you get on well? Is there any, this is just me from the human perspective, is there any ever altercations, or do you work well together?
Oh, come on, I'm his father. This has to be issues. It's a given, isn't it? Yeah. Look, it works like this. It does work out pretty well because I'm, if when the founding Luddite Society starts in Australia, I'll be the founding president. I can't even use a mobile at the moment. So I can't do any research. I can't find anything on a computer or a screen. I go and write with pen and paper. So what Evan does is he goes and finds all this stuff for me because I can't find anything. So it's a bit like I bring in one part of the equation, which is I can write a bit, and Evan does some of that too. And then he goes and finds all the information I need to build this up. So he's always looking for new science. And some of the times he shows me stuff and I think, oh, that's rubbish. I don't need that. And then 4 days later, I realized I actually did need it. So he brings in the empirical part of this that I can't find. Otherwise, I'd just be writing about my own personal experiences and walking on the site, and I wouldn't have that science. So that's a mixture of the two of us. Luckily, I'm just so illiterate when it comes to computers, and he isn't. There's a nice balance.
Yeah, we kind of balance each other out in a way.
Sure.
Yep.
So, guys, we're going to talk about the book today, Ancient Aliens in Australia. And I know you've got several books out there, guys, but you know, this is like a story that's kind of become taboo, and nobody wants to deal with this. But you guys have took this on, and I commend you for it because, you know, I'd watched the YouTube videos, guys, of yourselves and Auntie Bev and the Parksman. I think it was the Parksman who managed the Kariong glyphs, and you know, his testimony is key to this. So we're going to talk about. I think the first thing to bring is the Kariong glyphs. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And the Parksman that really, the guy there that kind of can testify to the authenticity of these and the antiquity, maybe that these guys are.
Whole thing. I asked him once, why didn't you say anything? He said, well, if I did, I'd lose my job. It was that simple. That was the threat. And he knew that. So he shut up. And when he left National Parks and Wildlife, he sat on this for a long time, didn't he?
He did, yes.
Because there was so much fuss and so many people were coming and they were doing the wrong thing. Yeah. He waited until someone approached this the right way. And he's decided we did. So then what happened was we then had a base. But Auntie Bev Spears, as you know, she was the other person on the interview. Now, her story is more important because she's the last full descent Darking Young elder, the spokesperson of the country, the one, in fact, she's called the keeper of the stories.
Yep.
Well, there's the person I've got to talk to. Now, Auntie Bev's a funny one because she only gives up a bit of information each time. To begin with, she wouldn't even say they were Egyptian. But this is where it gets interesting. There's a lot of people who complain that the glyphs look quite fresh, don't they, Evan?
They do, yeah.
They always say, too fresh.
Too, yeah, that's just happened. Yeah.
Auntie Bev told us the women would go there for millennia and go there and coat the actual glyphs in women's urine, not men's, women's urine, to keep it fresh. So when you put that together, you have the original people telling us, oh, it's thousands of years old. It is Egyptian. And you've got the last descent story keeper saying, and this is how we kept it fresh. Then you've got the gentleman who worked for the National Parks and Wildlife, chosen as their Aboriginal Sites Officer, chosen for that reason because of his skills, which are undoubted. He's telling us the same story. They're ancient. So what we then decided was, now we must speak about them. Because before that point, we don't walk anywhere. As I said earlier, we don't make decisions. The elders tell us what the decision is because they are the custodians of the history and the truth, not us. So once we knew about that, then we decided, now we look at the glyphs anew. And now we start to speak about them because the elders have asked us to do so. So that's really an important part of that. And as you mentioned, that's on one of our YouTubes. The second one, from my point of view, I would have had that first. I would have preferred that came first because we always like to lead off with the original story first. And we thank you for going that way. But unfortunately, other people who were doing this for us, and it was all done for free. We don't have much say when it's for free. It came second. But for us, it's the most important part of the story because without the elders telling us where to go, we don't go anywhere.
Mm.
Okay, so for the listeners then, we're talking about the Kariong glyphs. I have no problem over the authenticity of them. Or at least I have no problem over the authenticity of how they were found. Therefore, I don't believe any of the taboo around them and the hoaxing theory or the trick that was played or whatever garbage that was rolled out to dispel these glyphs. So I have no problems like pushing that aside. Like you into all this, and then we'll talk to Evan next.
Okay. Well, my background to begin with, I'm a teacher. And over the years, I became more and more involved in Aboriginal issues, Aboriginal culture, Aboriginal history, and I was involved in writing the course for New South Wales for the senior education, for the high school certificate rather. And over a period of time, people started to trust us, and they started to show us things that weren't mainstream at all. And it sort of grew out of that. And there came a time, and I do remember, I was at school, and every spare moment I'd have, I'd sit out the front and write. And then when I get home, I'd get to write till about 12 or 1 o'clock. And it dawned on me I was doing 2 jobs and I only had room for one. So we had to pick one or the other. So I walked away from teaching, and which is a reasonably paid job, to a paid job that's not so reasonably paid. We started writing. And what we're doing is, because of that 20 odd years working with the elders, we learned something. When the elders talk about oral history and talk about their past, they deliver it with such a passion and such a devotion and such an attention to detail. It soon dawned on me that this oral history was much more valid than anything I'd seen written on a piece of paper. And when we started doing this, we learned straight away, unlike a lot of archaeologists in this country who walk onto site with a preconceived idea of what they're going to see, we learned to do something at the very beginning most of the other ones still haven't picked up. We walked onto a site after asking permission and then spoke to the people and said, what is it we need to know? Tell us where it is, and then we'll try and justify it. So we came at it from a different point of view. We didn't walk in with an idea what it was. We waited for the elders to give us that idea. And what we've done is, when we're with elders that we know the old ways and are conversant in it, we don't question it. We just take it that way. If it wasn't for elders, we would never have touched the UFO story. In fact, when we wrote our first 3 books for University Press of America, we were very careful to stay very much in the strong science, and we did. That's why they published it. But the elders won't have it any other way now. We then moved into Egypt, and now we've gone past Egypt and we're just walking off into the skies. So it's a 25-year story that starts with teaching with a couple of Aboriginal kids and ends up working just with Aboriginal people. And now here we are now. I'm not teaching anymore, but we're still doing the same thing.
Wow. Evan, how do you come into this story then?
Well, my background's actually in social sciences and psychology. And while I was at uni, I did there's a bit of a broad degree. So I ended up doing a bit of archaeology and anthropology at uni, just for fun.
Today I'm going to be talking to Stephen and Evan Strong, a father and son archaeology team in Australia, and we've got some super interesting information to relate today. I haven't done any shows with Australian guests other than Max Egan and Santos Bernacci, but today this is going to be to do with ancient history in Egypt, and based in Egyptian hieroglyphs, based in Australia. And this is off the wall, but from what I see from the evidence and what I looked at, this is got credibility all over, and this is something that really needs to be addressed. So I'm looking forward to having these guys on. Just let me give you a quick plug in for the website. You can go to capricornradio.com. You can check out the archives of previous guests. We're going to talk about some of maybe Laird Scranton's tie-in, and you can catch out Laird's show there, and Shannon Dory, who's also researched the Dogon. Maybe we're going to tie in some of that as well. You can also check out the Facebook group and the Facebook page and the YouTube channel, all at capricornradio.com. Get involved, guys. Keep the guest requests coming in. I do look at every single one. I will do my best, and if there's a repeat of guest suggestions, that really draws my attention. So keep sending them all in, guys, and they're much appreciated. And thank you for all the well wishes and comments for recent shows. That's very encouraging, keeps me going. So I'm not going to go into the guys' bios today. Stephen and Evan Strong's going to give us that ourselves. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't read out the bio, but these guys are going to tell us all about it because this is part of the story. So without further ado, let's bring on the guest for today. Welcome to Capricorn Radio, guys.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for asking.
We're very happy to be here.
So that's Stephen I heard first and Evan was second. Is that correct?
That's a good pickup. It is
Very
right.
good,
Yes,
yep.
that's right.
Well, I have watched some of your YouTube shows, so I feel I got to know your voices a little bit. So Stephen is the father and Evan is the son. Is that correct?
That's exactly
That's
right.
it.
We've been called brothers on some occasions, and I thank those people for saying that, but unfortunately my age is beyond that.
Yeah. I get that sense there's like a brotherly thing there as well as a fatherly thing. You guys work very close together and you're very connected in what you're doing, I suppose. I guess I'm going to talk to the father first, Stephen. I want to know, what's your background? What got you treating these glyphs like they're a hoax when they really have been proved to have been there long before when they said they were hoaxed? So I think this is the key thing to bring in, the glyphs, how they were found by the parksman. I can't remember his name.
Well, that's really, I appreciate you've gone that way because you're actually going the way we would do this. When we first went to the glyphs, when we were first asked to speak about it, I wouldn't. We didn't even speak about it publicly, did
we knew that they were very tainted.
They're tainted, and we had
damaged.
all this Egyptian stuff we'd found. We'd found ankhs engraved into rock platforms and thoth engraved into rock platforms. We knew Egyptians were there, but we weren't going to touch it at all. So we came at this from the point of view as, no, we're not convinced. We didn't come here as someone actually swinging the banner saying we want to fight for the glyphs. We actually told them, we'll tell them Egyptians were there, but we won't touch the glyphs. So we've come at this from a very gradual process. Now, what you said is exactly where we changed our point of view. We conducted an interview with David Fitzgerald. That's the gentleman you were talking about. Now, the story with David is he works for National Parks and Wildlife. And what happened was he'd heard talk about these glyphs in 1978. Now, it's very important that date is locked in because National Parks and Wildlife and the Australian government would tell you they didn't know about it until 1983. That is a fact. You can ring them up and they'll tell you it was made in 1983. Now, what happened was David, what was called the Aboriginal Sites Officer. He worked for them, but what he would do is when there were Aboriginal sites, he'd be involved in that and work with the parks and they'd fix it up. He knew about this place, but they wouldn't give it to him. They wouldn't show him. So what he did was he found a site, a really important site, and he showed them pictures. They said, oh, well, take us out, we'll do it. He said, no, I won't take it out unless you take me out to the glyphs. So to cut a long story short, he was taken out at dusk and he was sworn to secrecy in 1978. And as he walks there, what he saw was just a couple of glyphs at the top. The rest of it was covered in tons and tons and tons of debris. Now, David said there was a roof on top until the 1960s. We now have a stat deck from someone, and we've written it in our book.
Yep.
Yes, there was a roof there. A tractor drove on the top in the bush trying to make a rubbish tip, very typically Australian. That's how we use the bush. And he drove on top of the roof and it collapsed. And it's still there today. Now, David said that from that point, 1960, rubbish had been falling in, and he saw decades upon decades of fill inside there. In fact, it took a gang 2 days to clear it out. Now, 1983, they reckon it was made. That's a lie. National Parks and Wildlife know it's a lie, and I'll call them liars now publicly, and have done so many times, and they know they're lying. David is quite insistent. So what then happened was, he then was basically told to shut up about the